21 days before she disappeared, someone was already watching. That is not speculation. That is what the FBI evidence now shows. And it changes everything about how this case should be understood. The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today's Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, has been running for 50 days as of this video. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department have processed tens of thousands of tips, recovered forensic evidence from multiple locations, deployed genetic genealogy, technology, and moved their command post from Tucson to Phoenix to consolidate federal resources. They have executed search warrants, detained and released individuals, and worked with Google, Meta, and Apple to extract data from devices connected to Nancy's home. No one has been arrested. No suspect has been named. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. But the evidence trail is longer, deeper, and more specific than most coverage has shown. The FBI is not searching for a ghost. They are building a case around a person who made choices, left traces, and followed a pattern that investigators are now reconstructing one day at a time. This is Crime Doc Network's full evidence timeline. What was found, when it was found, and what each piece of evidence actually means for the investigation. Every fact in this video comes from FBI press releases, Pima County Sheriff press conferences, NBC News, CBS News, ABC News, CNN, NPR, and News Nation field reporting. Where a claim comes from a single source, we will say so. Where something has not been confirmed by law enforcement, we will not treat it as confirmed. If you are watching this and you have any information about this case, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALLFBI. That number is still active. Investigators have said that even small details, things that seemed unimportant at the time, could matter now. Subscribe to Crime Doc Network and turn on your notifications. When this case breaks, we will have the full evidence breakdown ready for you the same day. Now, most coverage of this case starts on February 1st, the morning Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. That is the wrong place to start. The FBI does not think this case begins on February 1st. Based on what investigators have been asking the people who live in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood, the case begins at least 3 weeks earlier, in January, on a specific pattern of dates that no major outlet has fully examined. That is where this timeline starts. The Catalina Foothills is a residential community in the high desert north of Tucson, Arizona, where houses sit on large lots separated by dry landscaping and long stretches of quiet road. It is the kind of neighborhood where unfamiliar cars get noticed, or should. It is the kind of neighborhood where a person moving on foot in the middle of the night should stand out. Nancy Guthrie had lived in the Tucson area for more than 5 decades. She was not isolated. She attended church, she kept regular routines, she was active on social media. In December 2025, 5 weeks before her disappearance, she posted a family photo to Facebook. She was present in the way that people are when they feel safe in the life they have built. That life had a structure, and that structure, it now appears, was studied. Every Sunday morning, Nancy joined a church live stream at a friend's home. The same destination, the same time, the same day of the week. For the people who knew her, this was simply her routine. For someone watching from the outside, it was a calendar. But the FBI is not only focused on her Sunday schedule. They are focused on 3 specific dates, all of which fell on Saturdays, January 11th, January 24th, and January 31st. The first 2 are weeks before her disappearance. The third is the night she vanished. According to reporting by News Nation's Brian Enton, confirmed independently by Newsweek and Parade, FBI agents returned to Nancy's neighborhood in mid-March and specifically asked residents to check their home security cameras for footage from January 11th and January 24th. Agents asked about vehicle traffic in particular. They were not vague about which dates they wanted. They knew exactly which Saturdays mattered. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, speaking to Enton directly, offered a framework for what those dates likely represent. If the operation was planned for a Saturday night, she said, the person doing the planning would want to run reconnaissance on Saturday nights. The same lighting, the same neighborhood activity, the same window of time. You do not walk into something like this blind. You practice. 3 Saturdays. 3 visits, or at least 3 moments that left something behind worth finding. And on the third one, a 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and a weekly routine that anyone in her circle could describe, disappeared from her home in the middle of the night. The unease in this case does not come from what happened on February 1st. It comes from the weeks before it, from the accumulating picture of someone learning exactly when and how to move, and from the knowledge that whoever that person is, the FBI believes they chose this house, on these nights, for a reason that the sheriff knows, but will not yet say. That is where the timeline begins. Now let us walk through it, day by day. January 31st, 2026, a Saturday. Nancy Guthrie takes an Uber from her home in the Catalina foothills to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. She arrives at the home Annie shares with her husband, Tommaso Cioni. The evening passes without incident. Dinner, conversation, the ordinary rhythms of a family getting together on a weekend. Around 9:45 to 9:50 inches the evening, Cioni drives Nancy home. According to Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, who relayed this account to the New York Times, Cioni walked Nancy inside and ensured she was safely in the house before leaving. That is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie by anyone who knew her. What follows is a timeline built from physical evidence, electronic data, and footage recovered through digital forensics. It is not complete. There are gaps. The gaps are not accidents. February 1st, 2026, approximately 1:47 inches the morning, a figure appears at Nancy Guthrie's front door. The FBI released footage of this moment on February 10th. What it shows: a masked individual in dark clothing, wearing gloves, carrying a backpack with reflective straps, and holding what appears to be a gun in a holster positioned at the front center of the body, an unusual placement that firearms experts noted publicly. The person has a flashlight in their mouth. Both hands are occupied. This was not someone who wandered to the wrong address. The equipment alone describes intention. The suspect approaches the doorbell camera and raises a gloved hand over the lens. When that fails to fully block the view, the suspect steps off the porch, picks up vegetation from a potted plant nearby, and uses it to cover the camera. Not rip it from the wall, not smash it. Cover it, carefully, with what was already there, as though minimizing visible damage was part of the plan. What the suspect did not know: the camera was a Google Nest device. Even after the lens was blocked, residual data remained stored in Google's back-end systems. That data was later recovered. The FBI had footage the suspect believed was gone. The doorbell camera goes offline at approximately 1:47 a.m. The house goes quiet in the public record. Then, at 2:12 a.m., a separate motion-activated camera elsewhere on the property detects movement. There is no video available from that camera, only a motion trigger. Something moved in or near that house at 2:12 inches the morning. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker application registers a disconnect from her phone. The Bluetooth or Wi-Fi signal that kept her medical device synced to her Apple devices dropped. She was no longer within range. From 1:47 to 2:28:41 minutes. A motion trigger at 2:12 places something inside that window. Whatever happened in that house between the camera going dark and the pacemaker going silent has not been publicly disclosed by law enforcement. The physical evidence at the scene, blood confirmed as Nancy's found on the front porch, inside the house, and along the driveway, tells part of the story. The rest remains in the files. On the morning of February 1st, Nancy did not appear at her friend's home for the Sunday church live stream. Her friends called her children. Her children drove to the house in the Catalina foothills. They found blood. They called 911. The Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived and, within 24 hours, declared the case a criminal investigation and assigned homicide investigators to the file. The search operation, involving police dogs, drones, aerial resources, and assistance from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, found no trace of Nancy Guthrie. On February 2nd, the case formally shifted from a missing persons investigation to a criminal matter. Someone had committed a crime in that house. The question was who, and which direction they had taken her. The answer to that question may lie in a sequence of evidence discoveries that began almost immediately and continued for weeks. Each one added a piece. Several of them were later walked back. And one of them, the most technically sophisticated tool in the entire investigation, is still running. Here is what the evidence shows, and here's what each piece actually means. The first major physical clue came from the scene itself. Blood matching Nancy Guthrie's DNA was found in 3 locations: on the front porch, inside the house, and along the driveway. The distribution of that blood tells investigators something about movement, about the sequence of what happened, about whether Nancy was injured at the door or somewhere inside and then moved outward. Law enforcement has not publicly detailed what they believe the blood distribution indicates, but the presence of blood in all three locations means the event was not clean or controlled. Something went wrong, or something resisted. The doorbell camera footage, recovered from Google's back-end systems, gave investigators their only visual record of the alleged suspect. FBI Director Kash Patel personally published the images on his X account on February 10th, 9 days after the disappearance. The release was described as unusual by CNN, which reported that local and federal investigators on the ground in Tucson were surprised by the director's decision to post the footage publicly without prior coordination. The footage showed a masked male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, with a black mustache visible beneath the mask, wearing gloves, carrying an Ozark Trail 2.5-liter hiker pack, a backpack sold at Walmart, and armed with what appeared to be a handgun in a front center holster. Then came the first lead that looked like a breakthrough, and turned out to be something else entirely. Investigators found a black nitrile glove approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. The FBI confirmed that the glove appeared to match the type worn by the suspect in the doorbell camera footage. A DNA profile was extracted from it. The profile was submitted to CODIS, the FBI-managed combined DNA index system that holds more than 19 million offender profiles. No match. The profile was then prepared for forensic, investigative, genetic genealogy testing. But before that process could produce results, the Pima County Sheriff's Department announced that the DNA on the glove had been traced through other investigative means to a restaurant worker employed near the area. The worker had no connection to the case. The glove, despite matching the suspects in appearance, had nothing to do with the abduction. 16 other gloves were found in the same general area during the search. Most were traced to members of the search teams themselves. Investigators now turned to the DNA recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. That sample was different and significantly more complex. Sheriff Nanos confirmed to NBC News and Fox News that the DNA found at the property did not match Nancy or anyone described as being in close contact with her. It also did not match any profile in CODIS. And it was a mixture, meaning more than one contributor was present in the sample. C.C. Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon, a lab specializing in forensic DNA analysis, told NBC that mixed DNA is common in violent crime scenes, but presents specific technical challenges for genealogy work. The ratio of contributors matters enormously. If the primary contributor makes up a sufficient proportion of the mixture, the sample can be analyzed. If not, the genealogy process may not be viable with that sample. Investigators announced they were pursuing forensic investigative genetic genealogy through commercial databases, including GE Deadmatch and Family Tree DNA, as well as databases maintained by companies like Ancestry. The process works by comparing the unknown DNA profile against millions of voluntary submissions from people who have taken consumer DNA tests. Even if the suspect has never personally submitted their DNA, a parent, sibling, or cousin may have. That partial match builds a family tree. The tree is narrowed through public records, geography, and elimination. The process has identified suspects in several high-profile cases, including the Golden State Killer and, more recently, Brian Kohberger in the University of Idaho murders. In the Guthrie case, genealogist C.C. Moore estimated the process could take weeks to months, depending on the population group of the suspect and the quality of the sample. One additional technological tool was deployed that has not received significant attention. CBS News reported that investigators used a device described as a signal sniffer, a piece of equipment designed to detect active electronic signals, in an effort to locate Nancy's pacemaker. The device, if the pacemaker was still transmitting, could potentially narrow the geographic search area. Whether it produced any usable result has not been publicly confirmed. Subscribe to Crime Doc Network. The evidence in this case is still being processed. When the next confirmed development comes, this channel will have the breakdown. Several leads had already closed. The glove was gone as a viable thread. The CODIS search had returned nothing. The person detained near Rio Rico had been released without charges. And the operation at the residence 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, the one that drew enough attention to close surrounding roads for 4 hours on February 13th, had concluded without a public announcement of findings. In any investigation, dead ends are not failures. They are the process of elimination working correctly. But by late February, the public-facing record of this case had developed a specific texture: activity without resolution, movement without arrival. And into that texture, a new dimension of the investigation quietly emerged that most coverage did not explain in full. The FBI was no longer only looking at what happened on February 1st. They were reconstructing the weeks before it. Law enforcement sources briefed NBC News and Today on March 18th that the additional thumbnail images recovered from the motion-activated cameras covering Nancy Guthrie's pool area, rear yard, and driveway, cameras that had been analyzed in coordination with Google, Meta, and Apple, showed no suspicious activity on the night of the abduction or in the immediate days preceding it. Investigators had reviewed family members, landscapers, and pool workers captured in the archive, stretching back weeks. None of those images produced an investigative lead. But then investigators shifted their focus to two dates that predate the abduction by weeks. According to neighbors of Nancy Guthrie, who spoke to News Nation's Brian Enton, FBI agents arrived and asked them to review their own home security archives, specifically for January 11th and January 24th. Those are not adjacent dates. January 11th falls 3 weeks before the disappearance. January 24th falls 8 days before. What connects them, other than the ongoing investigation, is that both fall on Saturdays. The agents asked specifically about vehicle traffic. They did not explain why. Former NYPD Inspector Paul Mauro, speaking on Fox and Friends on March 18th, outlined two interpretations of this development. The more encouraging reading: investigators have identified a specific individual and are attempting to place that person in the neighborhood on those earlier dates to establish a pattern of movement. The less encouraging reading: investigators have found something in the forensic record, a cellular ping, a vehicle registration, a partial image, that points to activity on those dates, and are now working outward from that data point to understand what it means. Both interpretations point to the same conclusion. The FBI believes the crime did not begin on February 1st. It began earlier, on a schedule, on Saturday nights, when whoever was responsible came to learn the neighborhood before they acted in it. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, speaking directly with Enton, described the operational logic clearly. A planned operation executed on a Saturday night requires prior reconnaissance on Saturday nights. The same conditions, the same lighting levels, the same patterns of which houses go dark and when. The timing of January 11th, January 24th, and January 31st as a sequence is not random. Each one is a Saturday. Each one is a data point in a pattern that investigators are now attempting to fill in with camera footage from people who did not know, at the time, that anything worth recording was happening outside their windows. Former FBI criminal profiler Ann Burgess, analyzing the case for Press, described the behavior of the alleged suspect as reflecting a personal kind of crime. "There is some grievance," she said, "that is trying to play itself out. The individual had a purpose for being there. If someone intended simply to break into a home," she noted, "there are far simpler methods than the ones deployed on the night of January 31st into February 1st. Purpose, premeditation. A target chosen in advance for a reason that the Pima County Sheriff has confirmed he knows and has declined to share publicly. What does it mean when an investigator knows the motive but withholds it? In active kidnapping cases, motive is one of the most sensitive pieces of information in the file, not because it embarrasses anyone, but because it points directly at the suspect. Disclosing why a specific person was targeted can tell the person responsible for the targeting exactly how much the investigation already understands. It can narrow the suspect pool so precisely in the mind of that suspect that they alter behavior, destroy evidence, or move beyond reach. Sheriff Nanos has said, directly to NBC News, "We believe we know why he did this." He added that he believed it was targeted. He said nothing further. That silence is not bureaucratic caution. It is a deliberate investigative decision, and it sits at the center of everything this evidence timeline still cannot explain publicly. The investigation now carries a specific weight that the early press conferences did not have. At 50 days, with the genetic genealogy process running against commercial databases, with 2 pre-crime dates under active examination, with the evidence from inside the house still being processed in a Florida laboratory, and with a command structure now centralized in Phoenix to coordinate the federal and local threads, The question is not whether investigators have leads. They do. The question is whether those leads are converging on a name. There is one more detail from the evidence record that has not been adequately examined. In one set of images recovered from the doorbell camera system, the alleged suspect is visible without a backpack. In another, the backpack is present. CNN reported, citing a law enforcement source, that the image without the backpack was captured on a different day from the image showing the suspect fully equipped. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a public statement saying there were no date or timestamps associated with the images and that any suggestion they were taken on different days was speculative. Two official positions, directly in tension with each other. If the CNN source is accurate, the alleged suspect visited Nancy Guthrie's property on more than one occasion before the abduction. That changes the profile of the crime significantly. It means the approach on February 1st was not the first time that person stood at her door. It means there was a prior visit, without the full equipment load, for a purpose that has not been identified. It means whatever the suspect was doing on that earlier occasion left no public trace in the investigation record, which raises its own question. Did they accomplish what they came for, or were they interrupted? Or were they simply gathering information that they would act on later? The investigation does not answer that question. It only marks it. And the sheriff knows why. Here is the fullest picture the confirmed evidence currently allows. Someone identified Nancy Guthrie's home as a target. That identification was followed by at least 2 weekends of alleged reconnaissance in January, visits to the neighborhood on the same night of the week as the eventual abduction, consistent with the FBI's specific focus on January 11th and January 24th. The suspect, or someone connected to the operation, may have visited the property on more than one occasion before the night the crime was executed. The crime itself was carried out with specific equipment: a flashlight held in the mouth to free both hands, a backpack, a firearm in an unconventional holster, gloves, a mask, and the use of nearby vegetation to obscure the camera rather than disable it outright, suggesting a preference for leaving the scene without obvious signs of tampering. The blood evidence confirms that whatever occurred inside that house involved physical harm to Nancy Guthrie. The pacemaker signal cut confirms she was moved. The 41 minutes between the camera going offline and the signal dropping contained, within them, a motion detection event at 2:12 a.m. that has no corresponding video. 16 minutes after that motion trigger, the pacemaker went silent. Multiple ransom notes reached media organizations in the days following. The notes contain details not publicly known at the time of their transmission, including, according to CNN, the specific placement of Nancy Guthrie's Apple Watch. Authorities neither confirmed nor denied the authenticity of any note. A deadline of February 9th passed without contact from any party claiming to hold her. Savannah Guthrie had already stated publicly that the family was prepared to pay. The line was open. No one used it. A California man was arrested on federal charges for submitting a fabricated ransom demand in an attempt to profit from the family's desperation. The FBI confirmed he had no connection to the actual disappearance. The real notes, if they were real, led nowhere that has been disclosed. On February 10th, a traffic stop 60 miles south of Tucson, in a corridor that runs toward the Mexican border, produced a person of interest who was detained, searched via warrant, and released the following day. The Mexican state of Sonora confirmed to CNN that no formal assistance request had been made to them by the FBI at that time. Law enforcement officials briefed CNN separately that U.S. Border Patrol and Mexican authorities had been notified to remain alert for relevant information, as part of what the source described as standard investigative procedure. The Guthrie family cooperated completely throughout. They submitted to polygraph examinations, the results of which were reported by outlets covering the Day 47 developments and described as favorable for the family. Sheriff Nanos had cleared all family members formally in mid-February, and his statements since have been consistent. The people who love Nancy Guthrie are not suspects. The person who took her is someone else, someone outside that house, someone whose Saturday night movements in January the FBI is still reconstructing from the camera archives of people who had no reason to save the footage until agents knocked and asked. At 50 days, the investigation remains active. The genetic genealogy process is running. The evidence from inside the home is in a laboratory. The clothing in the surveillance footage is being sourced item by item. The 2 January dates are under examination. The sheriff knows the motive, and Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The Guthrie family has offered $1 million for information leading to a recovery or to an arrest. The FBI has added $100,000. Tucson Crime Stoppers has contributed an additional $102,500. The total exceeds $1,200,000 available to anyone who comes forward with information that breaks this case. One question this timeline cannot answer is also the one that matters most. The 41 minutes between 1:47 and 2:28 inches the morning of February 1st, with one motion event in the middle and blood in 3 locations, represent the core of what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Investigators know what is in those minutes. The public record does not. When that record becomes complete, it will define everything that comes before and after it in this timeline. There are 2 things this case makes clear that extend beyond the specific facts of one disappearance in one neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. The first is operational. The evidence pattern in this investigation, specifically the FBI's focus on January 11th and January 24th as dates of alleged prior reconnaissance, describes a method of preparation that has direct implications for personal safety awareness. Targeted crimes against individuals living alone, particularly elderly adults in residential areas, often involve a prior observation period that is visible in retrospect on surveillance systems. If investigators are canvassing your neighborhood asking for footage from specific dates you do not remember as significant, that request itself is evidence of a pattern. Residents who notice unfamiliar vehicles parked without apparent purpose on multiple evenings, particularly on the same night of the week across several weeks, have more reason to document and report than most people realize. The FBI in this case has specifically said that footage of vehicle traffic is particularly helpful. That is an actionable statement for anyone living in a similar community. The second is structural. This case raises a pointed question about what investigative genetic genealogy can and cannot do under time pressure when a victim is still potentially alive. The technology has produced convictions in cold cases where years of processing time were available. In the Guthrie investigation, it is being applied to a mixed DNA sample, while a vulnerable 4-year-old adult with documented medical needs remains missing. CrimeDoc Network will examine in a separate video exactly how Figgy has performed in active missing persons cases versus post-conviction identification, and what the current evidence profile in this investigation suggests about the likely timeline for a result. What this case teaches us about the gap between forensic capability and forensic speed is one of the most important and underreported dimensions of the entire investigation. Today is day 50. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's tip line is 520-351-4900. Both are active. Both matter. Subscribe to CrimeDoc Network and turn on notifications. This channel breaks down the evidence, not the speculation. When the next confirmed development in the Nancy Guthrie case emerges, we will have the full analysis ready. In our next video, we are examining the forensic genetic genealogy technique in detail. How it identified the Golden State Killer after 4 decades, how it helped convict Brian Kohberger, and what the specific evidence profile in the Guthrie case, including the mixed DNA and the absence of a CODIS match, means for how long this process is likely to take. If you want to understand what investigators are actually waiting for right now, that video is the one to watch. It is coming soon. Subscribe so you are there when it does. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 50 days. The investigation is still moving. Someone out there knows something. That number is 1-800-CALL-FBI.